And good morning, everybody. Jeff Slakey and Spencer Hughes on the Daybreak Show. On the phone line, representing the 6th District of the great state of Washington, it's Congressman Derek Kilmer. Good morning, Derek.
Good morning. Good to be back with you.
Well, it's nice to talk with you. Nice to hear from you. There's a lot going on as we head to your website, kilmer.house.gov. First thing right there, don't mess with the USPS, and this has been a real roller coaster ride following this story with the newly appointed Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on what has happened, and it appears as though he may be reversing course on some of the decisions.
Well, I think it's important to say up front, our Postal Service really provides critical services. I've in the last week spoken with small business owners who depend on the Postal Service for supplies and to deliver their products to customers. As a consequence of some of these operational changes that the Postmaster General has made, they're seeing delays. I talked to a veteran in Grays Harbor County who said, I depend on the Postal Service for my prescriptions, and he was really scared that there would be a lapse in the coming days. I talked to a senior in Silverdale who said she'd only seen her mail delivered to her mailbox every 2 to 3 days recently. And so it's important to acknowledge just the vital role the Postal Service plays in terms of delivering essential packages and letters, whether it's medication or supplies, or coming up here in November, ballots. And unfortunately, the new Postmaster General has proposed some changes, operational changes and organizational changes that would really undermine our hardworking postal workers. We're seeing proposed changes that would degrade delivery standards, that would slow the mail, and could potentially impair the rights of people to cast their votes in the upcoming November elections. And so that's really concerning. It's why I've sponsored a bill to try to unwind some of these changes. It's called the Delivering for America Act, and I'll be headed back to D.C. later this week to vote on that bill.
I see that he will be in front of the Senate on Friday and then in front of the House with some of your colleagues later in next week, Monday, I believe, next week. Do you think some of the actions that have already been taken, even if they're being reversed, are have cat's already out of the bag for some of this, or will we be able to get back to a better footing? Because I saw this morning on the news, I think some 330,000 Vote Vets said, I think some 330,000 pieces of prescriptions go out to the vets every day. And I know there's a lot of talk about the vote, sanctity of the vote. But as you mentioned with those delays, do you think the reversal will get us back to where we were quickly, or is it too little, perhaps too late?
Well, it depends if this bill that we're voting on later this week passes into law. What the Postmaster General has said, I think in part because, quite frankly, he felt the heat from the American people pushing back against these changes, he said that he wouldn't move forward with further changes. The problem is, to your point, we've already seen some damage done. And so the bill that we're voting on later this week not only would prohibit the postmaster from implementing any further changes, but it would restore the level of service to what was in place before this pandemic. It would just maintain service standards, maintain the integrity of our mail-in elections, and also provide some funding for the Postal Service. As you can imagine, just like everybody else, the Postal Service has faced additional costs for things like personal protective equipment, and has seen a drop in revenues. So that's why this bill is so important. I would mention, you and I've talked previously about the HEROES Act that actually included some funding for the Postal Service. And I think it's worth acknowledging that the funding that was included in the HEROES Act, the funding that we'll be voting on later this week, this is not sort of some Democratic wish list. The dollar amount and where it goes was driven by the bipartisan board of governors of the Postal Service. And so that's why we've pushed for the funding and for the operational integrity that we're pushing for.
Not many things have a 91% approval rating in the country, but I'm pretty sure the post office is one of those entities. I saw also in the news that the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is you're a part of, had a chance to meet with Chief of Staff Meadows the other day in kind of continuing coronavirus talks. Is that right?
Well, so I am part of a group called the Bipartisan Working Group. I co-chair that group and also co-chair a group called the New Democrat Coalition. And so given all of the hats I was wearing, I stepped away from the Problem Solvers Caucus because it was just one too many sets of meetings. And because I co-chair the other bipartisan coalition, the Bipartisan Working Group, I have focused my attentions there. But I think it is important that there's discussions happening between Democrats and Republicans with an eye towards getting to another coronavirus package. Listen, we know, I talked to a group of teachers yesterday. We did a town hall with educators and educational employees. There's real concern about not just potential layoffs to school districts, but people want to make sure that they can be safe and that kids can continue to learn. I speak on a daily basis with people who've lost their job as a consequence of this, and they're really concerned about their ability to put food on the table, to pay their rent. And I don't think that the federal government should just ignore those concerns. And that's why 3 months ago the House passed the HEROES Act. It's why it's important for negotiation to keep moving forward in hopes of getting a bill that will help solve problems for the American people.
What is it like in the House when you have passed bills like that and they just sit in the Senate for so long, and it appears though maybe, at least in that form, it would never be brought up? What's that? I mean, you guys have worked hard. I know there's a lot of work, not only from you, but your staffers and the whole House that votes on these things, and then it goes to the Senate and nothing comes about.
Well, I look at my job as there's sort of two parts of my job. One, standing my ground when there's something that impacts the folks that I represent. So no matter who I talk to in our region, Democrats or Republicans or independents, there's a sense that our political system is pretty broken right now. And so the very first significant legislation that passed this year was a big democracy reform bill that included campaign finance reform. And there's a bunch of components of that bill that I wrote. And it's disheartening to see that bill go nowhere in the Senate. But I think it's important to sort of put that stake in the ground that says, the folks that I represent want government to work better. And while reforming our campaign finance system may not be a priority for Mitch McConnell, it is a priority for the folks that I represent. The other part of my job is trying to find common ground when we can. And that can be hard. But, particularly in this COVID pandemic, we got to make sure we're taking care of people who need help. And, sometimes part of the way that happens is negotiation on the front end, and then you vote for a bill that, everybody holds hands and sings Kumbaya and votes for. Sometimes, as was the case with the HEROES Act, when negotiations have kind of stalled out, when the Senate has said, well, let's just take a wait and see approach, you're trying to some degree, use the laws of physics, right? An object at rest tends to stay at rest. The House will occasionally vote on a bill to try to put the object into motion and to try to drive some forward progress with the knowledge that it may not pass in the exact form that it passed the House, but to try to bring people to the table to start solving problems for the folks we represent. And so those are those are sort of the two parts of the job. Listen, the Senate has not been exactly a legislative juggernaut. There's a whole bunch of things that really matter to the people I represent in terms of, we passed an infrastructure bill, and you and I have spoken previously about the importance of not just investing in roads and bridges, but things like broadband, school construction, affordable housing construction. Unfortunately, that has not moved in the Senate, but I think that's really important to jobs. We've talked about the DREAM Act to make sure that young immigrant kids are not living in fear of being deported. That passed the House with bipartisan support, has so far gone nowhere in the Senate, but that doesn't mean that's not an effort worth undertaking.
This week is the Democratic National Convention. Have you had a chance to see some of it? The unity was on display for the Democrats as they went state by state, to nominate Vice President Biden as the Democrat nominee for president. What are your thoughts on this virtual convention?
I've only watched a little bit of it. I did get to see the, kind of the roll call of the states, which I actually thought was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And, made me think that maybe that's the way it should be done going forward rather than, people shouting in a convention hall. Listen, I think part of the strength of our country is the diversity of our country, that people come from all over the place, that they have different backgrounds in, different ethnicities, different, different walks of life. And I think what's been interesting to watch, at least in the bits that I've seen, is you've really seen that on display at this convention. People from all over the place with different perspectives, just saying, it's not enough to just say, we got to get back to normal. Really the key is we got to build back better. We really have to make sure that there's a new normal where we're not leaving communities behind economically. That's why I'm in this job, right? I was an economic development guy who just felt like, too many of the communities in our region are getting passed over when it comes to economic opportunity. And that's not okay. I don't want our region's main export to be young people. And so I am really hopeful that as we look at not just getting back to normal, but building a new normal, that it's a new normal that includes everybody, that it's where there's economic opportunity no matter what zip code you live in. So that I think is a big theme as well. And we'll see what happens in the next 2.5 months.
Representing Washington's 6th District, it's U.S. Congressman Derek Kilmer. Good to have you on the phone this morning, and we'll check in as we move closer and through the months, all right?
All right, you take care.
Good Thanks. To talk with you.
You too.
Bye.